The Rose of the Thorn Queen. When Elara was born, her home smelled of damp earth, the musty odor of old hay, and her mother's pungent sweat. The sounds of magical chimes and rustling silk belonged to the noble ladies in the city, and had nothing to do with her. Her world consisted of a few tiny plots of land, several muddy paths, and an endless horizon. Compared to the magnificent and sky-high kingdom of Eldoria in the distance, her home was nothing more than a rat's nest. Eldoria, a land where magic and spells ran rampant, was like an old tapestry woven with countless complex spells and ornate powers, stiff, rigid, and exuding a sense of decayed nobility. There, a person's worth was measured by the magical heritage they possessed. Elara? She had none. Her days, day after day, were like an old ox pulling a millstone, monotonous and dull, with every breath smelling of the soil. Her older sister, Lyra, was the family's only hope, like the brightest star in the night sky. From a young age, a soft, luminous healing magic radiated from Lyra, a beacon of hope in their land. The villagers said it was a healing light, capable of curing illnesses, mending wounds, and even making withered flowers bloom again. It was a miracle, a source of hope for everyone. Lyra was sent to the city's magic academy to become a healer's apprentice, an honor of the highest order. Every silver coin Elara earned with her blood and sweat in the fields was sent to her sister without hesitation. Those coins, carrying the sweat from her palms and the scent of the soil, were entrusted with all her hopes for her sister, for her family, and for a future that seemed impossibly far away. Elara, work a little harder, and Lyra can buy that book on advanced healing spells. With that book, she can become a true healer, her mother would say, mending Elara's coarse cloth clothes under a dim oil lamp. The lamp's light was weaker than a firefly's, but it illuminated the pride on her mother's face. It was a light Elara had never seen, and one that would never belong to her. "I know, Mother," Elara always replied, her voice barely a whisper. She didn't envy Lyra's fate, because she never believed she deserved such a destiny. She knew her place too well, a soul abandoned by fate, a waste. The tax collector arrived, a corpulent man whose strong scent of spices was utterly out of place with the village's smells of mud and livestock. His sharp words were like a venomous snake's hiss, complaining that their taxes were too low, his tone filled with a contempt for the lower classes that felt like a slap in the face. "What is this useless daughter of yours good for, besides eating? What good is she?" The tax collector's gaze, like a viper's, fell on Elara, cold and malicious. "What? Are you hoping your sorceress sister will pay your debts for you? Her meager apprentice stipend isn't even enough for a decent robe." Elara lowered her head, gripping the wooden bucket in her hands, her knuckles white from the strain. The rough splinters on the bucket's rim pierced her skin, causing a faint sting that was nothing compared to the piercing humiliation in her heart. She didn't retort, because in Eldoria, the tax collector's words were law. All she could do was endure it silently, like a tamed animal. One evening, Elara, dragging her exhausted body, ran along the field ridge, her chest heaving like a bellows. She was chasing a stubborn lamb that had broken free from its flimsy pen. If she lost this lamb, her father would sigh in disappointment, her mother would lose a source of income, the tuition money sent to Lyra would be tight, and their only hope would be extinguished. The lamb gave her a sly look and darted into the ominous darkness of the whispering thicket. Legend had it that the forest would swallow anyone who dared to enter. However, Elara had no choice. That lamb was their family's only asset. She bit her pale lips and stepped into the forbidden place. Inside, the light instantly dimmed, and the air was filled with the scent of decaying leaves and damp soil. She pushed through the dense bushes, the thorns scratching her skin like knives, leaving behind fine streaks of blood. She saw the lamb, trapped by a cluster of thorny, winding vines, bleating in despair. Elara reached out to untangle the vines, her fingertips carrying the scent of soil and the salt of her sweat, along with a nearly foolish stubbornness. The moment her fingertips touched the vines, a sharp thorn pierced her palm. A drop of bright red, hot blood oozed from her wound, glistening and seductive. The drop didn't fall to the ground. Instead, it landed precisely on an ancient, twisted tree root at her feet. The root instantly glowed with an ominous green light. This light then spread at a visible speed, following the roots deep into the soil, as if blood rushing through subterranean veins. "Ah!" Elara let out a short, painful gasp, one that contained a hint of fear and a hint of excitement. At that moment, an unprecedented, primitive, and wild torrent of energy, like a hurricane born from the clash of lightning and earth, instantly surged through her body. It wasn't the elegant, gentle magical flow of sorcerers, but a brutal, tearing impact, accompanied by a deep ache in her bones and a boiling in her blood. This power was so ancient and fierce that Alara felt she was no longer just herself, but was being inhabited, consumed, and transformed by something greater and more primal. Driven by an unseen force, she stumbled and followed a humming sound deeper into the forest. The thorns that had once seemed so terrifying now parted automatically before her, making way obediently. The air grew heavier, more primitive. In the heart of the woods, in a clearing surrounded by tall, ancient trees, she saw him, a figure. He possessed a raw, untamed masculinity, as if he were the embodiment of the forest itself. He was a half-beast, a being that only existed in ancient legends and the terrifying stories her mother whispered, a wild creature abandoned by the civilized world. His body was forged from blocky muscles, covered in countless scars from battles. Alara felt an instinctive fear, but was also deeply drawn to his eyes. Those eyes, though fierce and wild, seemed to see through her humble exterior, reaching the forgotten corners of her soul. He was Kale, the silent guardian of the whispering thicket. Kale's gaze fell on her, with no pity or disgust, only a kind of ruthless appraisal. His low growl was like the wind in the deep forest, carrying an incredible, complete disregard for her status as a waste. "You are no waste." His voice was hoarse and rough, like bark rubbing together, yet it held an undeniable certainty. "You are a vessel for a forgotten power. Your blood awakened it." Alara's body trembled, not from fear, but from the immense shock of his words. For years, she had been told she was a waste. Kale took a step closer, his tall figure casting a large shadow over her. He reached out with his clawed hand and touched her injured palm. That wild energy surged into her again, more fiercely than before. "The fire inside you has been ignored for too long." Kale's eyes seemed to see through her, spotting the sparks in her soul that had been buried by years and humiliation. "I will awaken it. I will make it burn." He became her mentor, and her world was turned upside down under Kale's guidance. He didn't teach her the rigid incantations of the Magic Academy, but how to dance with this wild, chaotic magic. "Feel it, Alara. It's not inanimate, it's alive. It breathes, it roars." Kale's voice echoed through the woods like a leopard's growl. Alara fell countless times, her hands and feet cut by thorns, dirt and blood mixing together. She would sometimes cry and scream in despair, "I can't do it. I'm just a waste. I'm nothing." But Kale never backed down. His eyes burned with an unyielding belief. "Yes, you can," he would simply say, then use his rough hands to help her up. "Because you are it, and it is you. You've just forgotten." He taught her to listen to the voices of the tree roots, to feel the vitality of the soil, to sense the cycle of growth, decay, and rebirth. He made her realize that power didn't come from rigid spells, but from nature itself, in its most primitive form. Their connection was instant and undeniable, like two ancient trees with intertwined roots. It was a bond forged under the stimulus of a shared secret, a forbidden power, and an unspoken understanding that they were both rejected by the civilized world. With Kale, Alara felt a true freedom and a sense of belonging she had never imagined. Under Kale's careful guidance, Alara began to shed her timid shell. Her hands, once calloused from farming, now learned to control thorns, weaving them into shields and whips that moved at her will. The first time Kale held her hand and let her feel the power deep within the earth, the surging energy nearly made her fall. "Focus your mind," Kale's low voice was like the wind in the woods. "Let your anger and injustice become your strength. Let them burn, let them explode." Alara closed her eyes, and the tax collector's contemptuous gaze and the suppressed tears in her mother's eyes flashed in her mind. A burning energy surged from her palm, and she felt the ground beneath her feet begin to tremble. A thick thorn shot up from the ground, pointing at the sky. Her voice, once soft and hesitant, now learned to summon the earth's fury, making the ground shake beneath her feet and creating fissures that swallowed her enemies. The power coursing through her veins was intoxicating, a glorious, fierce, and savage freedom. She was no longer a victim of her lineage. She was the master of a power more profound and ancient than any sorcerer in Eldoria could comprehend. "They're back to collect taxes, Elara," said the old woman next door, Martha, her voice trembling. "They want even more this time, and our harvest isn't enough. They said if we don't pay, they'll confiscate our land. We can't live like this." Elara looked at Martha's withered hands, covered in dirt and cracks, just like her own. Anger spread through her heart like wildfire. The tax collectors, dressed in fancy silks, came like raiders, plundering the villagers' meager hopes. Lyra's letters became less frequent and more somber, speaking of the Academy's elitism and the kingdom's growing indifference to its people. In a recent letter, Lyra wrote, "The sorcerers here only care about their lineage and power. They are indifferent to what happens outside and even believe that poverty is a sin of the weak. I feel so powerless." Elara crumpled the letter, imagining the suffocating feeling Lyra must have felt in the city. However, the real turning point came suddenly and cruelly. On a bitterly cold night, Elara's village was set ablaze by royal guards. The flames soared, lighting up half the night sky, and wails and cries filled the air. "Elara, run! Don't mind us!" Her father's hoarse voice rang out from the inferno. Elara was held tightly by Kale, watching helplessly as her home was reduced to ashes in the raging fire. In that moment, something in her heart completely shattered, but at the same time, another fire was ignited within her, not the ashes of despair, but the flames of rebellion and revenge. She was now a force of nature, and she decided to use this power to make the wrongdoers pay, to have them bleed for what they'd done. She became a legend in the shadows, the Thorn Queen. Her name, like a bolt of lightning, spread among the common folk. They called her the Protector, a spectre who toppled the powerful with wild fury, a mythical avenger. She never showed her true face, for her power was her signature. Her work was undeniable. Wherever she went, she left behind only despair and rebirth. Royal caravans, once arrogantly traversing the country roads, now mysteriously disappeared on the edge of the whispering thicket. Days later, they would be found empty, covered in thick, thorny vines. The corrupt tax collectors who had once lorded over the people were found bound to ancient trees in the woods by tenacious roots. Their ill-gotten gains quietly returned to the villagers. Elara led a rebellion, not with cold steel, but with the untamed, unpredictable power of the forest itself. She moved like a phantom in the night, bringing justice to the forgotten and the oppressed. Her journey was a relentless march toward her true self, a baptism of blood and fire. The obedient girl who once accepted her fate was gone, replaced by a brave, resilient, and powerful leader who could shape her own destiny. Kale was always by her side, no longer just her mentor, but her equal partner, her comrade in arms, her lover. He taught her strategy and control, showing her how to use her wild power with precision in every action. "Anger makes you strong, but wisdom will win you the war," he once warned her. "Knowing your enemy is more important than having great power." But most importantly, he saw her for who she truly was, not a waste, but the woman she was meant to be, a queen of power and wildness. Their bond deepened with every shared victory and every quiet, vulnerable moment in the woods, a bond that grew deeper, like the roots of a tree. Whenever she returned exhausted from a mission, Kale would silently clean her wounds, his touch rough like tree bark yet incredibly gentle. She would confide her doubts and fears to him, and he would always listen quietly, then look at her with his ancient, wise eyes, giving her silent strength. Their love was a testament to the wild, a connection that defied the rules and expectations of the civilized world, a love that was undefined, primal, and pure. The final confrontation was a violent clash of two worlds. On one side was the kingdom of Eldoria, with its cold and intricate magic, representing thousands of years of hierarchical oppression. On the other side was Elara and her followers, who commanded the ancient and primitive power of nature, symbolizing the awakening of freedom and wildness. The battlefield was a vast plain just outside the whispering thicket. The kingdom's most powerful sorcerers, led by the Grand Sorcerer Ursus himself, surrounded the Thorn Queen and her army of rebels, farmers, village women, and hunters. The sorcerers, wearing intricate silk robes, formed a flawless circular array, their staffs gleaming with various colors, exuding contempt and control over mortal lives. "You waste," Grand Sorcerer Ursus's raspy voice, amplified by magic, vibrated the air. You think you can shake the kingdom's 1,000-year foundation with this savage power of weeds? You are nothing but a misguided farm girl. However, Elara, who stood opposite them, wore armor woven from the most resilient tree bark and deep green leaves of the whispering thicket, glowing with a faint fluorescence. A crown made of sharp thorns sat firmly on her head. Her eyes, once filled with submission and numbness, now shone with a piercing light, sharp and unwavering like a glow from the depths of the forest. 1,000-year foundation? Ursus, Elara's voice, though not as booming as his, had a penetrating power that went deep into the bone. That is just a lie you use to oppress the people. Your foundation is built with the flesh and blood and tears of the innocent. Behind her, Kale stood tall like an ancient, immovable tree. His half-beast form, every muscle full of explosive power, was Elara's strongest bulwark. The rebels, who had once been too afraid to even look at the royal guards, now held crude farming tools, their eyes no longer filled with fear, but with a primal fire of rebellion that had been awakened within them. The battle raged. Grand Sorcerer Ursus was the first to attack, waving his staff to send a fiery fireball hurtling toward Elara like a meteor. The other sorcerers followed suit, a massive net of elemental magic weaving together with ice shards, lightning, and wind blades. Elara closed her eyes, feeling the pulse of the earth beneath her feet. She spread her arms and let out a low growl, her voice no longer human, but the roar of some ancient beast. The earth trembled, responding to her call. The fireball was swallowed by a sudden eruption of earth walls and twisting thorns the moment it hit the ground. The ice shards were entangled by vines that appeared out of thin air, turning into harmless water. The lightning was drawn up into the sky by towering ancient trees that shot up from the ground. Elara responded with the primitive, chaotic power of the forest, not just defending, but consuming and transforming the enemy's attacks. Thorny vines erupted from the ground, twisting and coiling like living vipers. They not only blocked the attacks but also went on the offensive, charging toward the sorcerer's formation. The sorcerers were horrified to find that their prized magic was so fragile and predictable against the wildness of the thicket. They tried to burn the vines with fire, but the vines Elara summoned were endless. When one was burned, 10 more would sprout from the ground, growing at an even more ferocious speed. This is impossible. She's a waste. How can she have this power? A senior sorcerer yelled in horror, his voice trembling with despair. She's one with the forest. She is the forest itself. Another sorcerer's voice trembled, filled with a sense of impossible dread. Grand Sorcerer Ursus's face was now a mask of rage and disbelief. He watched as his sorcerer team was entangled in thorns and dragged into the ground by vines, his order collapsing around him. With a roar, he gathered all his remaining magic and unleashed his most powerful spell, a beam of pure destructive energy capable of leveling a castle. He intended to erase Elara and everything she represented with a single blow. The beam, carrying the force of annihilation, shot toward Elara, a harbinger of death. Kale instinctively moved to block it, but she pushed him aside. This is my fight. This is my destiny. Elara's eyes shone with an unyielding light. She spread her arms, her body becoming one with the earth. In that moment, she felt the ancient pain of the land, the breath of all living things, and the forest's trust in her. She was not just using magic, she was magic itself, the soul of this land. She let out a soul-shattering roar. At her command, from the depths of the plain, a power more ancient and monumental than Ursus's beam was awakened. The earth shook and rattled, and with a deafening roar, a colossal wall of tough roots and ancient rock rose from the ground, reaching for the heavens. This wall was not inanimate. It was growing, breathing, and every inch was filled with primal power. Ursus's destructive beam slammed into the wall, erupting in a blinding flash. But the wall didn't budge. It greedily absorbed all the impact, completely devouring the explosive energy. When the light faded, the wall still stood tall and mighty, while Ursus's power was utterly depleted. The staff in his hand shattered into countless fragments, and he collapsed, as if all his strength had been drained. His arrogance was completely shattered by Elara's deep and unbreakable connection to the earth. In the end, Elara's unwavering will and her profound love for the land and its people triumphed in this cataclysmic clash. The kingdom's corrupt foundation completely collapsed. The sorcerers were defeated, and the people were freed. Cheers rang out, a sound of liberation, of rebirth, and the highest tribute to the Thorn Queen. Elara turned to face Kale, who stood silently behind her, his eyes filled with pride and a deep, abiding love. Kale's hands moved from hers to her waist, pulling her flush against his body. He lowered his head, his lips brushing against hers, a soft, tentative touch that quickly deepened into a fierce, consuming kiss. His hands moved from her waist to her face, cradling her as he deepened the kiss, his tongue tracing the seam of her lips until she opened for him. She responded with equal fervor, her hands finding their way into his long hair, pulling him closer. Their lips finally parted, and Kale's forehead rested against hers, his breath ragged. "We did it, my Thorn Queen," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. Elara's response was a soft murmur, her own breath catching in her throat. Kale's powerful half-beast body, every muscle filled with wild strength, now embraced her with extreme tenderness. His passionate kiss, which had been aggressive like a beast's, softened in her response. In the silence of this new world, their intertwined bodies were proof that their love was not a weakness but the very cornerstone of the new world they had built. It was a wild, untamable love, and as essential as the earth beneath their feet.